Well, welcome to the webinar this evening, everybody. Delighted to have our presenter, Stephen Heaney, with us. Stephen, are you there on the line with us?
Hi, Sophia. Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. I'll introduce Stephen in a moment, but I just wanted to welcome all of our listeners to this webinar, which is going to be focusing on working in the oil and gas industry. And we're delighted to have Stephen with us to give us an insider view for the webinar this evening. So my name's Sophia. I'm based in our Bristol office of the Officers Association. So I'll be helping to facilitate tonight's presentation. But the main star of our show is Stephen, and just a brief introduction of Stephen, who's going to be taking us through the topic tonight. Stephen is currently a cost and cycle improvement leader within subsea production systems at Baker Hughes, which is a GE company. Stephen left the forces and transitioned in January 2016, so he brings some really relevant knowledge to that transition this evening, which he'll also be sharing with us. When Stephen left the forces, he joined GE on the ex-military programme, which he'll be talking through as we go through the webinar. But Stephen's background in the military was 8 years in the REME, in Herrick 10 and Herrick 16 as both platoon commander and Apache engineer leader, and as well as being a chartered engineer and an IETC aimed assessor as well, which hopefully I've covered that right for this evening. So without further ado in that introduction, I'd just like to hand over to Stephen for what we're going to cover in the webinar this evening.
Thanks, Sophia. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me this evening. Yep, so just what we're going to cover today. So I'll do an introduction to General Electric, the company itself. I'll then do an intro to Baker Hughes, a GE company. So that's the company that I work for, who form part of the GE family. And then we'll talk about the oil and gas industry in some general terms, and then some specific terms on what rules would be good for us as transitioning ex-military people. And then I'll go into some sort of transitioning tips and finish off with the program that I joined GE in, the Junior Officer Leadership Program.
Fantastic. So before we get started on the content for tonight, just do a quick poll question for everybody. So our first poll question is around revenue. So Google's annual revenue for 2016 was 89.5 billion US dollars. So the question tonight is, what was General Electric's revenue for 2016? So you've got your answers there: A, 0 to 25 billion, B, 25 to 50 billion, C, 50 to 75, D, 75 to 100, and E, over $100 billion. So you should be able to see that the majority of you, over 45%, thought that GE's revenue was over $100 billion. And then we've got an even split between the rest of you between 25, 50, and 75. So, Stephen, over to you to talk us through how that, what the answer is and how that fits in.
Yep, so glad to see that 45% of people got it right. So the answer is, I think it was $111.5 billion for revenue in 2016. And I just wanted to put that in just to sort of put it into context, the size of the company that General Electric is. It's not a well-known company in the UK. And but as you can see, it's a massive company that has massive amount of revenues, which for us transitioning out of the military means if we get into a company like that, there's going to be a lot of opportunities. Okay, so moving on to the first part of the presentation, what we're going to cover, and it's the intro to General Electric and Baker Hughes, a GE company. So I'll quickly run through the history of General Electric. A bit about what we do in general, a bit about the culture, then focus in on Baker Hughes, a GE company, and then finish off this first section with a look at the oil and gas industry. Okay, so this quote from Edison: "I find out what the world needs, then I proceed to invent it." I'm not sure if many people would be aware of this. I know I wasn't until I started to look into GE in a bit more detail, but Thomas Edison is actually the founder of General Electric. He formed the company in 1892, so 125 years ago. And this has been at the core of GE's strategy and culture throughout its 125-year history, trying to create innovations that the world needs in multiple industries. And with Edison, we've got this iconic individual who created the company, and in the last sort of couple of generations of chairmen that have run the company, again, are sort of quite iconic individuals in the business world. So two chairmen ago was a man called Jack Welch. And if anybody's done any reading into the sort of business world, he's a very well-known figure, very well-respected, and people still talk about him in his time at GE, and he left the company 16 years ago. After that, we had Jeff Immelt, who, again, another very well-respected leader across the business world globally. He transitioned the company through quite a sort of tumultuous period over the 16 years that he's been in the position of chairman. I think within his first week of being within the company as chairman, he, 9/11 hit, and that massively impacted the aviation industry, which was one of the biggest parts of our business. Then a couple of years later, the financial crisis hit, and GE was massively exposed to this because of our GE Capital business, one of the largest banks in the world. And then he's proceeded to take us from a industrial focused company and set the steps in place for us to transition into a more digital focused company. And only in the last couple of months, he's transitioned into the next stage of his career outside of GE, and we've got a new guy in position, a guy called John Flannery, who's been with the company for 22 years. So he's got big boots to fill, but he's got a great reputation within the company and outside. So it just sort of sets the scene of where GE has come from and the type of leaders that we have within the company.
So it's quite a strong pedigree there, Stephen, I would say.
Yeah, no, massively. Yeah. And that's the sort of standard that GE sets for the very senior guys. And that's one of the really exciting things about being part of the GE as a company, is that when you look at the leaders around the business, you know that they've actually earned their position, and they always seem to promote the right people. So you feel sort of quite confident that you've got good leaders around the business. So let's just take a quick canter through some of the products and sort of industries that GE's been involved in throughout its history. So in Edison's day, it was around the light bulb. GE invented the dynamo, and were one of the sort of four players in the X-ray machine as well, I believe. In the 1900s, they were it was actually the UK that invented the jet engine, but GE recreated that engine for the first time in the US, and are now one of the biggest players, if not the biggest player, in aircraft engines globally. We've also been involved in a number of appliances business, and also the lighting business, as I mentioned, and the digital business that we're moving into now. And then also around healthcare. They're one of the biggest providers in the medicine industry, especially around MRI technology. And I mentioned there a couple of times the sort of the digital thread that is trying to be put into the business now, and that's definitely the focus for all the businesses within GE, is to become this digital industrial company. And it was GE that actually coined that term, so they're trying to become the equivalent of Google within the industry, the industrial area of business. So here we just look at some of the businesses that GE are involved with. So as you can see, you get transportation, renewables, aviation, oil and gas and power, which we'll talk about in more detail, energy connections, and healthcare. So there's a wide range of businesses across the sort of infrastructure, industrial arena. And one of the great things about the way that GE works is that they link all these businesses together via the sort of the GE name. So if you go on to the next slide, thanks, Sophia, and how this benefits not just GE as a whole, but the individual businesses, is that they become greater than the sum of their parts. I mentioned the GE store there. So, for example, within the oil and gas business, we have used some of the MRI and X-ray technology within the healthcare business. So the patents are already there. The the technology has already been created. So then us within the oil and gas business have been able to provide our customers a product that no other customer in the oil and gas business can provide because of that link into the healthcare business. And another benefit with this is that when you have a lot of these industrial businesses go through cycles, so when the oil and gas business is going through a bit of a down cycle at the minute, 10 years ago it was the aviation business, but when the aviation business was in its downturn, the oil and gas business was doing very well, so they were able to support each other financially, and that's sort of been proven out with the oil and gas business over the last couple of years. We have made some of our biggest acquisitions. I think the latest one was a year and a half ago. We bought Alstom for $15 billion, and that was when the oil and gas industry was on its knees. So the industries and companies within the GE sort of flagship have that sort of protection because they're come under the GE name and can support each other.
A massive breadth of companies there, really, under sort of one brand as well.
No, definitely, and that again, as I mentioned before, it opens up opportunities. So if you get into one of these businesses, but then actually feel that you really want to work in renewables or aviation, then the internal job website that GE has covers all of these businesses. So I can type in GE Aviation and see what jobs are available there, or GE Healthcare to see what jobs are available there. And some of these roles won't be advertised externally; they'll just be advertised internally. And then what we do, sort of bridging the physical and digital worlds. Again, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but what we're trying as a company to lead towards now is the massively pushing the digital side of things. So. I think at the latest count in a presentation I heard a couple of weeks ago, GE is currently connected 50 billion machines to its own operating cloud system, which is called Predix. So this is sort of like the Android or Google Play Store or App Store for the industrial companies, and GE have created this platform. It sits in the cloud and it allows other companies to create their own applications for the industrial market and then can sell them on the platform. It's all open source, very much like Google, and yeah, GE are very much going after that sort of software arena, whereas originally it would have been companies like IBM that would have focused on this, and they would have been playing in the industrial world. GE is the first industrial company that actually is moving on its own towards a software digital strategy, and the aim is in the next sort of 5 to 10 years that GE will be one of the top 10 software companies in the world. So not only industrial companies but software companies. So if that's the sort of industry that you're looking to get into, then there's massive opportunities within GE.
Brilliant. So just moving on to sort of how you work then as a sort of company, sort of having a bit of an impression of the size of it. Yeah, a bit about how you work within that.
Yes, it was, Sophia. Thank you. So one of the things that GE has tried to push over the last number of years is that they are a 125-year-old startup. So you've got the sort of entrepreneurial spirit within the company to sort of feel fast, try new things, but then you've also got that support and from being within an organization that's got quite strong structures and quite a strong financial background as well. So we've got the opportunity to see the best of being an entrepreneur, but then also bring the best of being a massive conglomerate as well. And the great thing about the people that sort of match that sort of entrepreneurial spirit is when it comes to the diversity of people that GE brings into the business. And I think that sort of not only matches sort of the individual when it comes to the sort of generic sort of diversity term, but also it matches quite nicely to ex-military people coming into the business. because no matter what sort of walk of life that you come from, if you've got a good idea or if you have a good vision, then you will be heard within the organization and you will be given the opportunity to sort of develop. And another thing that GE sort of prides itself on is nurturing the people, the training that's offered throughout the organization, whether you be at a very senior level or at a very junior level, is next to no company in the world, to be honest, especially when it comes to the leadership programs. GE is one of the best companies when it comes to sort of spotting talent within the company and outside of the company as well, and then putting them into some sort of fast track system, giving them lots of training, lots of support, lots of mentors, as mentioned on the slide, which gives that person the opportunity to flourish.
And just a quick question we've had come in, Stephen, just around sort of how that's comparable to the military in terms of training. Is it sort of on a par to the sort of training you might get in the military, or is it sort of a different level or a different type?
So the main difference that I would see is that within the military, and my experience within the military training when it comes to sort of captain's warfare courses and the courses that you need to do to promote to the next level, there's less of those types of courses and there's more focus to exactly what you need. GE is an organization that's got 350,000 people within it, and a lot of the courses that are run globally. So when you go to a course, you're going for a specific reason to help you with your specific role or a specific development area that you need to cover. So whenever you come back from that course, you can really sort of implement and impact the business based on that training. Whereas sometimes you would find in a military course, you would go to it just because you need to tick in the box to get to the next level. And when you come back to the business, when you come back to your company or your regiment, perhaps it's not as implementable when you return.
Brilliant. So I think we're just going to move on to the next poll question before we get into the next section and content of the webinar. So this poll question is around the oil and gas industry. And the question is, how many oil and gas employees have been made redundant in Aberdeen since the downturn? So you can see your possible options there. So I will just launch this poll question for you. So how many O&G employees have been made redundant in Aberdeen since the downturn? 0 to 10,000, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, or over 40,000. So, an interesting split. So 42% thought 0 to 10,000, 8% thought 10 to 20, 42% thought 20 to 30, and 8% thought 30 to 40. So nobody went for over 40,000. But there's a clear two winners between the 0 to 10 and the 20 to 30 there. So I will just close that for you. And Stephen, if you sort of have your reflections on that as well.
Yeah, real cheerful question for a Tuesday night, as you can see. But the reason I put that one in was just to show you what the potential opportunities are as the oil and gas industry moves out of the downturn that we're currently in. The answer is actually over 100,000 people within businesses based in Aberdeen have been made redundant since the downturn over the last sort of 3 years. So that's a very big number, and these people aren't all living in Aberdeen. So with Aberdeen being the centre for the North Sea businesses, so the operators, the product companies, and the suppliers, they may be based in Aberdeen, but then would just use it as a hop-off point into like one of the rigs, for example. But it's still a massive number. But as I said, as we transition out of this downturn, and there's definitely a lot of chinks of sunlight coming through now, more large tenders and more large projects are coming online, and so there's more opportunity. So just think about if you're getting into the oil and gas business, yes, those redundancies have happened, but think of it more as an opportunity for the amount of roles that will be coming online over the next year or two.
So from a positive to a negative, I think there as well in terms of opportunities. So that was really great. So over to you, Stephen, now for the next section of the webinar, and really talking about sort of, Baker Hughes and as a GE company, and perhaps explain a little bit about the new logo, which people might not be familiar with.
Yeah, so Baker Hughes, a GE company. So 2 months ago, GE Oil and Gas merged with Baker Hughes and became Baker Hughes, a GE company. GE owns 70% of the company, just under, and then the existing Baker Hughes stakeholders own 30% of the company. We still fall under the GE umbrella, but are a separate entity as well. But the good thing is we can still tap into all the GE-wide organizations and strategies, and the GE store that I've mentioned before, and Predix that I've mentioned before. But it's been a really great opportunity for the companies that have joined, because GE Oil and Gas was a mainly product-focused company, whereas Baker Hughes had really great expertise in services and the sort of downhole reservoir technology. So the two companies merging has led us to be very much a full stream company, and we see ourselves as the only actual full stream company in the market, and I'll go into a wee bit more detail on that in a couple of minutes. But just go back one, Sophia. But if we look at the company as it stands now, so we operate in over 120 countries. We've got sort of two focuses. We've got the focus where we are a global company, and we've got that global footprint wherever the customers are. So if we've got projects happening in sub-Saharan Africa, then we build plants and get a project management team down there and operating out of that base. But we also have the centres of excellence across the globe as well, mainly based in Houston and the UK for the oil and gas business. We've got two HQs, one in Houston, as I mentioned, and there's a lot of other opportunities within the Houston area as well, because there's a lot of product companies based there. The second HQ is in London. To be honest, in the oil and gas industry, there's very few roles that are based in London, especially when it comes to the product companies. Maybe a few more when it comes to the operators, but definitely not that many when it comes to the product companies. For Baker Hughes, a GE company, our main sites are up in Aberdeen, which is the sort of subsea home of the UK, and actually the subsea home of the globe, and then down in Bristol as well. We've got two sites down in Bristol, and about similar sort of numbers across the two sites in Bristol and the site up in Aberdeen. You might ask why we have a oil and gas company in Bristol, and it actually all came around and started with the sort of 35-40 years ago, when the oil and gas industry was first put subsea electronics, so electrical modules below the sea. Before that, it was all just hydraulically controlled. In the aviation businesses in Bristol, which we all know has got a sort of a very strong aviation history. There's a couple of companies that seen this as an opportunity to get involved in a diversifying into another industry, and it just built up over a number of acquisitions in a number of years. So originally it was Marconi, then ABB, then Veco Gray, then General Electric, and now Baker Hughes, a GE company. So a lot of acquisitions over the years, but a lot of expertise brought into the business. 70,000 employees across what was the two businesses, now a single business. $23 billion worth of revenue combined. Obviously, we've only been operating for just over 2 months, so we haven't got our own annual revenue figure just yet. And 125 years of experience, and this is actually oil and gas experience, which is really good. Baker and Hughes were names that have been involved in the oil and gas industry for 125 years, and actually were leaders in the US in their industry at the same time that Edison was a leader in his industry around the electrical systems. So quite nice synergy over the history, and the individuals would have known about each other, and it would have been interesting to pick their brains to see if they would have considered back in those days, seeing in 100 years' time whether their companies would have been one. So very similar cultural and heritage to the two companies, and it's been a really good, really great synergy when it comes to the merger.
Brilliant. So if I just move on to the next, we're going to talk about upstream, midstream, and downstream. So over to you, Stephen, on this one.
Yes, so this is just to give you a bit of a quick understanding on some of the terminology that you'll hear within the industry, and if you're applying for any rules. So as I mentioned, so Baker Hughes, a GE company. I still haven't got quite used to it yet. Baker Hughes, a GE company, are the first full stream company within the industry. So upstream, we are involved in the production of oil and gas. We're involved in the downhole technology and the reservoir technology. Midstream, that's all about pipelines, storage, liquid nitrogen gas, that type of industries. And then downstream, it's all about refining, processing, the petrochemical industry. My business is the subsea production systems business, and that falls within the upstream business. And if you go on to the next slide, we can just have a quick look at some of the products that are involved within my company. So we do everything that takes the oil out of the reservoir underneath the seabed and then gets it to the topside facility, whether that be onshore or whether that be some sort of rig or platform. If you see on the diagram, trees, so this sits on top of the wellhead and is more or less a massive tap and valve system, and it sort of switches on and switches off and controls the flow out of the well. Our trees business is based up in Aberdeen. Second business and product line within subsea production systems is the manifolds and connection systems business. As you can see on the diagram, the manifolds takes the lines and the pipelines and the umbilicals from the trees into one sort of central point, and then that reroutes the flow to either an onshore facility or a topside facility. A couple of reasons for this, the main one being around reducing the number of lines that you would have going from the reservoir to the facility, and the pipelines and umbilicals there actually can cost around $1 million per kilometre. So if you've got a 60-kilometre offset and you've got 10, 12, 18 lines running back from individual trees, then that's obviously going to cost a lot of money, but you can reduce that cost by putting in a manifold and then just sending one larger pipe back. And then the third product line within subsea production systems is the one that's based in Bristol, and that's the production and control systems. So this is all the electronics and the electrical control systems, so the brains of the systems, and they sit both at the topside facility, whether it be the rig or the floating platform, and then also as pods within trees and within manifolds. So the brains of the system is spread across the whole architecture of the subsea system, and then control the topside. And we're also moving to the digital side of things, which links into that as well, which means that the operator, our customers, say at BP, an exec can be sitting in his office in London and can pull up some information on his platform that's sitting sort of either in the North Sea in the UK, or it could be off the west coast of Africa, off Perth, Australia, where Perth is. So great opportunity within the Bristol business to move into, again, this sort of digital side of things.
And I think it's fascinating because if you sort of you don't realize what's actually there in terms of you hear about these big businesses and you hear about the sort of big infrastructure and things that's going on, and it's till you sort of understand how it all connects together and actually what's going on in the different parts of the country and the world that picture starts to build up really. So I think now we're probably ready to move on to the sort of the final section of the webinar this evening as well. And this is really talking about sort of, transitioning the junior officer leadership program specifically, and also talk about sort of, the different types of roles and perhaps where our listeners sort of, when they're thinking about moving into this industry, where it fits and how best to make the most of in terms of the transition. So over to you on this, Stephen.
The reason I put this slide in was one of the challenges that I found when I was transitioning out of the army was around getting a good understanding of where my skills and experience would actually sit in the industry, not necessarily or specifically within the oil and gas industry, but I'll give you a few sort of insights here. We all usually look at project management or program management when we transition out of the military. It seems like a good fit, and it is a good fit for military officers that are moving into industry. If you've got Abbey Wood or specific and demonstrable project management experience, then you should be able to sell yourself quite easily into one of these types of roles. If you haven't had that sort of specific project management experience, then the stepping stone quite possibly would be an assistant project manager role. But if you got into a company that's large enough to accommodate sort of moves once you get in there, then projects are so fluid within the industry, and people are moved from one to another as the need sort of comes along. So if you get in, maybe not at the project management level, but the assistant level, and start to make a name for yourself, you'll quickly bounce up the project manager's role and be able to fulfill that role quite easily. Next one was around manufacturing. Again, within the military, we don't do a lot, if any, manufacturing, but we do a lot of engineering, and we have a lot of people that have good technical backgrounds. And manufacturing is a really good fit for anybody who's got a technical or engineering background. A lot of conversations that I hear within the manufacturing team are the exact same conversations that I used to have as a engineering officer in the REME. You just substitute engineering and put in manufacturing in most of those conversations. Within manufacturing in that sort of area, you also have operations managers, which are heavily involved in the manufacturing side of things. You've got Lean Six Sigma leaders, health and safety and environmental managers, anything in and around there. If you were just going for a pure sort of Lean Six Sigma role, then perhaps you might not have the experience to be very successful in that. But if you're going for a Lean Six Sigma leader role or an HSE manager's role, where there's more leadership involved, and you have an understanding of those other sort of facets, then you've got an opportunity to sell yourself into those roles quite easily as well. Engineering. This one, it sounds like a simple transition if you were an engineer within the military to transition into a engineering role within a company. If you're moving into a company that's doing repairs or modifications or maintenance, then yes, that transition is very easy. If you're moving into a company that makes stuff, then you have to work much harder, and it would be difficult for you to go into a pure engineering role where you are the engineer. Much easier for you to go into a team leader or a management role. Again, you'll have to work hard to show where your experiences transfer across. But at the management level, it's definitely very, very easy to make those steps and to sell your story into that type of role. Field operations, very critical within the oil and gas industry. You've got the field service engineers, which operate on a sort of 4 week on, 4 week off rotation out on the rigs. not that much, well, no leadership responsibilities, to be honest, and those type of roles would probably be more suited to your sergeants, staff sergeants, colour sergeants sort of level. But there have been, I have heard of a couple of sort of ex-military officers going into those type of roles, because they are, it's very similar to the sort of operational tempo that you would have and you'd be used to in the military. But within the field operations side of things, you do have team leader roles and region leader roles, which are great fits. And again, it's just about selling yourself into those roles, reading across what they're asking for in the job spec, and trying to tie in your experiences. HR, human resources. This is one that I thought that any any military officer could do quite easily, transitioning into a civilian company. But what and I think what most people within the military understand is HR is slightly different, and is seen as something different within a civilian company. So we all know the sort of basics of personnel management, but there's much more to HR within a civilian company than just that. And to be honest, the roles that are available in HR, the majority are sort of at a quite a middling level, and I wouldn't see that they'd be sort of meaty enough or punchy enough for sort of young aspiring ex-military officers trying to move into a second career. There are sort of senior roles obviously available, but they're far and few between, and getting into them, one of those might be difficult. So just one to consider. And then quality, risk, not similar roles, but from what I've seen, people transitioning into those type of roles, you either have to sort of live that role in the military, or you need to do some sort of training, so using your enhanced learning credits to do a quality course or a risk manager's course. And it's a bit like the HSE role, the health and safety role. You would be aiming at a management level and having a good understanding of quality, having a good understanding of risk, but not actually be involved in the nuts and bolts of quality or risk. And then the final one, sourcing, commodity management. It's a well, as you would imagine, a very good fit for any sort of supply officers within the military. And from my experiences and from people that I chatted to before putting this presentation together, there's definitely great opportunities within the sourcing and commodity functions for a good leader with supply experience to come in, and it's right for opportunity for not just a good leader, but then somebody who's a good change manager as well.
A question we've just had to come in, Stephen, is around sort of, I suppose it's comparing, trying to compare like with like, so moving from the military into any of these area roles in terms of, without sort of specifics on salaries, would you say that people would move sort of parallelly across, or would they take a dip down in your experience, or go in at a higher level, to sort of the level at which is it comparable to the sort of salaries or experience level you had in the military going into a civilian role?
It's a difficult one, and it is definitely on a case by case basis. If you get into a larger organisation, then there's more opportunity, I think, for you to be able to go in at a level that's, when it comes to remuneration, that's equal to what you're getting in the military. If you're going into a smaller company, then they'll be expecting you to have direct experience and be making an impact on day one. And if you don't have that direct experience and you can't make an impact on day one, then they're not going to pay you as much. But a larger company understands not only people transitioning from the military, but transitioning from another company. I've heard a number of times within GE, leaders saying to their new employees that are coming in at the management level that sort of spend the first few months just getting to know the company and getting to know the people around the company and the stakeholders that you need to be involved with. And then only when you get the 6 months time within the company that you will start to make an impact and start to make a difference in your role. A smaller company can't afford to do that. So I think it is in a case-by-case basis. If you're sticking within your experiences within the military, so if you're going from an engineering role to an engineering role, then there's more chance that you'll stay on a par. But if you're making a pivot in your direction as within your career, then you have to expect a bit of a drop.
Brilliant. I think that moves us nicely on to sort of transition tips in general as well, and sort of your reflections from your transition from 2016 as well. So yeah, it'd be great to hear sort of your transition tips here as well before we move into the JOLT specifically.
Yep. So the first one from me was just a congratulations. I know if you've given notice to terminate, then it's a big decision to make, and but you are on the first step to a successful second career. My only caveat is this is the time that you need to start putting in the hard work for the transition, whether you're sort of 6 months in or have just signed off or have been given sort of 12 months notice. You really do need to sort of start to carve out some time and some regular time to commit to your transition. The next one, if you're on this call, then you've been talking to all the team at the Officers Association, and they always hammer into you. It's all about networking, and it really is the amount of opportunities that you get from the networking side of things, and perhaps not necessarily sort of like an individual saying, "Yep, here's your job." But just hearing about the industry, hearing about where there may be opportunities, that all comes from networking. And the more you do, then the better you'll get at it. And the better you get at it, then the more opportunities will come. So the first thing that I would say is make sure you get yourself squared away with a business card. You don't want to turn up to a networking event and have somebody that potentially would like to get in touch with you again in the future and perhaps doesn't have that opportunity because you don't have a business card for them. Start to look at networking sort of meetups that are around the country. So start doing it on LinkedIn. The one in the Southwest is the ALMA network. There's the liquid list. There's a number of them across the UK, and the guys at the Officers Association will be able to point you in the right direction into all of them. And just get there. As soon as you have made that decision to leave the military, or it's been made for you, get to those networking events. Everybody's there and willing to help. And whether you're sort of a week out from leaving the military and you haven't got a role, or you're sort of 12 months out, it's equally as important. A couple of other points: if you're sort of networking as an individual to an individual, never bring a CV along with you. Everybody's got their phone with them. If they need a CV, then you can email it to them within a second, so there's no point in bringing it. Never ask for a specific job. You're just there to have a conversation, to learn from them, usually if it's an ex-military person, learn from their transition and learn from their experiences in the military, and be humble about your past, your experiences within the military, and just ask loads of questions. And the more questions that you ask, then the more opportunities that will start to present themselves. And then further on down the line, if there are advertised roles within the companies with that person that you have connected with, then that's the time that you sort of start to bring up the topic of roles. You would never do that in that first conversation. Next one, inspiration. So for me, this one was key. I really wanted to work for a company that I believed in, especially having been within the military, an organization that has a real purpose and a great reputation across the UK and the globe. I wanted to have a company that I wanted to get up in the morning and go to work. And for me, that was around a company that sort of made stuff. I'm an engineer by trade, so I wanted to be involved in the making of products. And if you've got that inspiration for the industry and the companies that you're applying for, then all of a sudden it becomes a lot more fun when you're researching about the company and the technology and the products that they have. And then that enthusiasm is very obvious when you're talking to the people, whether it be a recruiter or when it comes to interviews, the hiring manager. The next point is to get your priorities sorted as quickly as possible. The quicker that you do this, then the more opportunities you have to get into a role and a company and an industry that you want to. So whether it be sort of location, as I mentioned, location when it comes to sort of oil and gas product companies, not that many opportunities in London. So if you want to live in London and work in the oil and gas industry, then it's going to be quite challenging. But if you're restricted by your locations, then start to look at the industries that are available within the location that you want to live in. Then once you figure out what that industry is, or sorry, what that location is, then start to see what industries are within your locations, and maybe put a ring around the area that you're prepared to travel to open it up to an hour, half an hour, whatever that may be. Once you've decided on location, industry, then you have to start to think about the company type, whether you want to, for example, work for a smaller company or a consultancy company where you perhaps have more freedom once you get into a role to make it your own. But then perhaps less opportunity to progress or promote, or go into a larger company where if you don't have a specific or a definite idea of what you want to do longer term, get your foot into the door in that company and then start to plot your ascent within that larger company. And then the role, whether the role is important to you or whether it's the company or the area, just run through that sort of list of priorities, make a decision, and then start to search for those roles potentially available. If there's no roles available on the web searches and the job searches they're doing, then you need to go back to the top of your priority list and figure out, is there something that I need to change here going down my priority list that'll open up more roles for the area that I want to work in. Next one for me, I think I left my sort of ELCs and CTP sort of credits too late to make a real impact on some of the jobs that I was applying for. So I think once you've got those priorities sorted and you know the industry and the type of company and roles you want to go into, then just make the plunge, spend the money, and start to whether it be a project management qualification or a health and safety qualification, just get it under your belt, and it'll start to improve your lingo and your terminology when you're going into interviews, whether it be telephone interviews or the actual face-to-face interviews. Quick one on CVs. Definitely tailor your CV to the company that you're applying for, but try not to. So if you're going for project management roles, then have yourself a project management CV. If you're going for project management and engineering roles, then have a project management and engineering CV. But keep them very focused to those type of roles that you're applying for, and then tailor it to the company that you're applying for. So focused on the roles, but then tailored for the company. And then the last point on sort of transitioning. For me, I think the interview and getting an interview should be the goal that you're aiming for, not necessarily getting the job. And the reason I say that is that we need, as ex-military people, we need to work hard to translate our experience into something that a company actually wants and needs. But once we get our foot in the door of a recruiting process and get through that CV sift and get through that telephone interview and get to a face-to-face interview, my belief is that the average military officer, with the experiences that we have had and the background that we have had and the opportunity to lead at a young age that we have had, will sort of be much more stronger than the experiences and the opportunity to lead than the average person who just went into a civilian company when they left school or university. So getting to that interview and getting the opportunity to get in front of somebody is what you're trying to achieve.
And Stephen, I think they're really good sort of transition tips. And one question we had come in whilst you were talking there was around whether this program is just the UK based or whether it's also with GE as such a global company and it has the US base as well, whether they're sort of, employing veterans is something that GE does as a company globally as well as in the UK.
Yeah, so the job, so the Junior Officer Leadership Program. So if you're living in the US, then you have to have been within the US military to join the program into the US. Now that I'm in the program and joined it via the UK, if there was a role that I wanted to do out in the US, then I could do that. One of the guys that's on programming at the minute, he was out doing a project management role for 8 months in Ghana. He's obviously not didn't go join the program via Ghana. He joined via the UK. So you have to join the program via the country that you did the military in. And then you can there's the opportunity to go wherever you want.
Fantastic. And I think before we move on to sort of the JOLT program and sort of, final questions around sort of working for GE, I think those transition tips there, I just echo everything you said, particularly as you said about networking and prioritizing as well. And like the webinar tonight, there's loads of resources available either on the Officers Association website or the CTP website, or just generally through people that have. I remember meeting Stephen back in 2015 when we first opened the office in Bristol, and sort of 2 years later, you're now. It's fantastic that you're now prepared to talk through our audience tonight and share your experience as well. And so I think the one thing that people would find in transition is the people that went beforehand sort of remember what it was like, sort of sitting there and planning, and are really willing to sort of support. So I think it's just using that network and using it as early as possible to make the most of your transition. So I would just echo that and thank you for sharing those tips. So I think now if we move on to the final section, which is around, we've been talking a lot about the JOLT tonight, so just sort of putting that in context and the opportunity coming up specifically just to share with the audience.
Okay, yep, thanks, Sophia. So I'll quickly run through this, conscious that we've only got 5-6 minutes potentially left. You'll be able to get a lot of this off the internet if you just Google JOLT, Junior Officer Leadership Program. It started in the US in '97, so it's been going about 20 years. Very well known program within the US. Very little known about it in the UK because it's only been going within the oil and gas business for 3-4 years, within aviation just over 2 years. So less well known, but a great opportunity. Successful job alumni that we've got going into project management roles, program manager roles, manufacturing leaders, engineering leaders, and we've also had a couple of people transition into sales roles as well, especially in the aviation business. I think there's at least one former pilot who's doing quite well in the sales function. So he's obviously been used to talking about and selling himself for the last 10-15 years as a pilot. So he's now selling products for the company, which is great. Current UK jobs within Baker Hughes, a GE company. We've got a field service engineer, Europe leader. Really great opportunity for that individual. He's got 9 direct reports and then another 110, I think, that come under that. Project management, compliance management, and then product management, what I'm involved in. And then the program itself, the aim is to support military veterans as they transition out of the Army, Air Force, or Navy, whether that be within the program or even if you don't get onto the program, there's still people within the organization that help with people transitioning, hiring them, and then growing them. Selection criteria for the JOLT within the UK: degree qualified, 5 years minimum commissioned service, obviously an exemplary record, and a max 2 years separation from leaving the military. Selection process for Baker Hughes, a GE company. We start off with a CV sift. then a telephone interview with a HR person and someone that's either ex-military or ex of the program. After that, then we go to an assessment day. We do 3-4 interviews in one day up in Aberdeen, and you also get a site tour. So quite a rigorous selection process, but for what you get at the end, it's definitely worth putting the preparation and the effort into. And then the program, 3 8-month rotations within different functions. So for example, my 3 rotations were engineering, the first one, commercial, the second one, and product management, the third one. And it's all building towards that final off-program role. It's a very sort of grown-up program. It's not like a graduate program where they give you a role and say, "Yep, go and do that. Here's your next role. Go and do that for 6 months." You get a selection of roles for your first rotation, and after that, it's all down to you. You have to network around the business to find out where there's a need for your type of experience and your capabilities, and it's all down to you to find those opportunities to develop yourself over those 2 years with the mentoring that's made available to then secure that off-program role. The training, there's a set suite of training packages that we go through. Lean Six Sigma being one of them, leadership courses. We get the opportunity to go to GE's Leadership Center in Crotonville in New York. Non-GE employees pay $10,000 to go on that course, and we get it as part of the program. It's not like a military course where you go and you're sort of sleeping in your sleeping bag on a badly sprung bed. It's all nice hotels, and everything's paid for, from the sort of food, accommodation, a bit of booze if that's what you want. So it's you're always very well looked after when it comes to travel.
And so I think that's given a sort of broad overview of the programme, but I think what we would say is that the next iteration in terms of applications is launching hopefully in the autumn, which is coming soon, and we'll share, as soon as that's ready for launch on the application, we'll share those details on the Officers Association website. But what we will also do is email directly everybody that's been on the webinar this evening as well, with details, more details of the programme and how to apply as well. Obviously, the webinar tonight has been a fantastic introduction into that, but as soon as that programme's live, which we're thinking is a sort of autumn time, Stephen, is that right? Then we'll be able to share details about how to sort of be considered for that programme or make your application.
Yes, that's correct, Sophia. We've got the senior leaders have agreed that we want to get the next iteration, next 4 guys into the programme. It's most likely going to be split between Aberdeen and Bristol. So potentially 2 Aberdeen, 2 Bristol, maybe 3 Aberdeen, 1 Bristol. Hopefully towards the end of towards the end of this year, we will be actually recruiting and getting people into the business.
Brilliant. And so I'm conscious of time, but if just to sort of summarise before we go to the final few questions that we have time for as well, if you just want to sort of, any final thoughts from you, Stephen, on sort of tonight and summing up what we've talked about as well for the listeners.
Yep, as Sophia already mentioned, networking, it's key. For me, inspiration, find out what it is that it inspires you for this second career that you're sort of embarking on, probably going to be longer than your military career, so it needs to be something that inspires you. And then definitely go for a company that you believe in. You've all been part of the military. It's a great organisation, the military, and a very proud thing to do, and you want to have that pride in your company that you're going to transition into.
Brilliant. And I think we've got time for I'll just pick a couple of questions that we've had in as well. One around sort of the time from sort of, obviously specifically you went into the job, Stephen, but in terms of people transitioning either into the job or into a similar or into a role into GE. So the length of time from sort of making an application through to sort of, you know, being on your first day in the new job, sort of just a sort of indication of sort of how long that process might take for somebody.
Yep. So for the program, the flash to bang will be really quick. So once we get that okay, to get the job to go live on the system, then it will be probably 4 weeks to 6 weeks on the system. 2 weeks after that, telephone interviews. 2 weeks after that will be the assessment day, and then 1 day after that, you'll find out whether you've got it or not. So within an 8-week period, once the role goes live, you'll find out whether you're working with GE or not.
Fantastic. And I think just one final question from the audience around sort of if people want to make applications, is it best to just go directly onto obviously we'll send around details directly of the jolt, but if people want to find out more about GE as well, what's the best way for people to connect in? Is it to sort of have a look on the website and see what roles are available?
Yeah, that's it. So for all the GE businesses, there's a single sort of job website. So if you just go onto that, if you want some specific information or some contacts within the other businesses, then feel free to reach out to me and I'll see what I can link you up with. But yeah, the first port of call will be for jobs in general within GE is that website.
Fantastic. And I've just put the contact details on there. So if people do want to sort of get in touch with us or want to follow on the conversation, then do get in touch with us at the OA and we can connect you in as well and give you some more information. But I really wanted to say a huge thank you to Stephen for his time and preparation and sharing his experience tonight. I think it's been a fantastic and insightful overview of just the breadth and the size of a company in terms of GE, let alone the revenue. But what I think is it gives that breadth of opportunities as well. Specifically, there's the JOLT program, but in the size of a company like GE, who has a long history in employing veterans as well, there's some fantastic opportunities within the industry and for people to consider and start planning as well. So with that, a huge thank you to Stephen and to our listeners this evening for being engaged. One final point is that the webinar has been recorded tonight, so we will make all the slides and all the content available on our website. It's a bit like BBC iPlayer, so you can go on there and download the webinar if you want to sort of recap on what we've covered tonight. But thank you, Stephen. Thanks for your participation and have a good evening, everybody.